Itan. It's a pleasure and honor to be here to speak with all of you and to present with my esteemed colleagues. There's a lot to get through in the short period of time that we have. And so what I'd love to do is kind of give you a big picture of what's happening with our immigration and civil rights, and what are some of the particular areas where we are seeing some significant changes, and then an outline of some of the important things that we as the Iranian American community and our broader community of immigrants can do to try to stop some of these very concerning changes. So many of you have been hearing, and as Itan outlined, we're basically facing a multi-pronged assault on our constitutional rights. And I am not exaggerating the level, the breadth, the depth of the problems. We are seeing a wholesale attempt to clamp down on freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and it's being done through the weaponization of our immigration laws. Because not only are our immigration laws outdated, but they don't have the same protections built into it like our criminal justice system does. And so the government is attempting to use the immigration laws because there is so much more discretion in there. The employees of these agencies have much less ability to be independent, like our judiciary, like our courts. And if they don't follow the rules, whatever those new rules are set by the Trump administration, then they will be fired. And we're already have seen mass firings, not only in our immigration courts, but now in the State Department and obviously in many other government agencies. And the government knows that our immigration laws are weak, and their approach is to basically violate all the standard norms. They're changing policies, and they frankly don't care if they are breaking the law because their approach is sue us to stop us. And they know that many people can't afford an attorney and that they might languish in immigration detention, or they might be stopped at the airport and not allowed entry, or they may be denied a visa, and that they don't have the resources or the connections or the information on how to connect to an immigration attorney. And so they're getting away with a lot of these violations. And it's only because of communities coming together, lawyers coming together, organizations coming together to try to sue the administration to stop some of these where we've been having success. And it's going to be so important that we continue to build upon that. So what are some of the areas that we've been seeing some of the most significant erosion of our immigrant rights? Obviously, we see it on the domestic side. We see it with USCIS, which is the Immigration Office, previously known as INS, where they basically adjudicate our applications for green cards, for citizenships, our family petitions. And we see it at ICE, where there's not only massive funding now and an attempt to hire thousands of new ICE agents, but to then round up people in our communities and detain them in for-profit prisons. And then we see it in our immigration courts, like I said, with the firings of so many judges, with changing of policy. And we see it also at CBP, which is Customs and Border Protection, where we have many Iranians and even Iranian Americans having problems at airports and not being able to get any kind of due process there because there are limited rights. I want to break down some of these different areas that I've talked about. So with USCIS, obviously we've been hearing a lot in the news lately related to denaturalization, where the government has threatened that they're going to look at how someone obtained their citizenship and make a determination if was there something fraudulent or was there some misrepresentation, and they will then try to denaturalize someone. And obviously we've heard that in the news a lot related to Elon Musk now because he's fallen out with Trump. We see that with Mamdani, who seems poised to become mayor of New York City. And this is something that we saw during the first Trump administration as well. So that's something that we need to watch and continue to be vigilant on, and keep an eye on how are we going to be addressing that. The other area we see is a ballooning and the number of cases pending at CIS again, there appears to be incredibly long delays now developing for citizenship applications, green card processing. So we can continue to see, I think, more delays over the coming years, just like we did during the first Trump administration. There are many other areas related to immigration with CIS specifically, but because we're short on time, I'm just going to be covering some of the highlights. The next agency that we're seeing many problems with is ICE. As Itan mentioned, we're seeing very concerning raids in our communities, in workplaces, even for people that have a pending application. Maybe they have a pending asylum case, a pending immigration court case. There actually have been terrible instances reported of Iranians testifying in court in their immigration court hearing on their asylum case, and ICE comes in and detains the person and takes them away. And then we obviously have heard of the issues related to CBP, where Iranian Americans are entering the United States, and Customs and Border Protection puts them into what we call secondary inspection and goes through their phones, goes through their luggage, asks them inappropriate questions related to politics and their family members in an attempt to gain information. Essentially, what we're seeing is an information dump. They're taking people's phones and laptops and downloading information from them in an attempt to, broaden their, what they say, their national security lens and viewpoint. Now, not everyone is experiencing this, okay? And I think that's really important to explain the distinction between the rights of US citizens and green card holders and visa holders. And I know that's going to be spoken to later by one of my colleagues. Because I can't tell you how many times I've actually had US citizens who are Iranian Americans or, other immigrants call me concerned about traveling and whether or not they could be detained at the airport. Could they be denied entry at the airport? And that is not the case for US citizens. For green card holders, it is a bit different. And so, connecting with legal counsel or with organizations like NIAC and others to understand truly what are your rights at the airport are so important. Now, what basis is the government, kind of relying on all of this? And how can you be prepared in understanding, what's happening? So the context of what the government has been doing is looking at everything through a national security lens. That is their, basis of why they're justifying, they're trampling on our rights. And there were two executive orders that are particularly concerning that impact our communities most, especially as Iranian Americans. There was the executive order related to combating anti-Semitism and an executive order related to protecting the United States from terrorists. And so I think the most important, if you take away only one thing from what I'm telling you all today, is to know that US government immigration officers and agents are viewing everything as a national security decision. That's it. That's the most important thing for you to know and understand how you and your background might fit into what you're doing. And so obviously most of what I'm talking about today are related to non-US citizens. So, keep this in mind. But when they're looking at an application, for example, at the embassy for someone applying for a student visa or a work visa, or even for a green card, let's say based on marriage or based on, being parents of a US citizen, the mindset of a consular officer is they do not want to be the one that lets someone into the US who ended up being a national security risk. And they would rather deny hundreds, thousands of people visas rather than take a chance on someone if there's something that just seems off, or if there's incomplete information, or there's a contradiction. Maybe, a person wrote that, oh, I went to X university, but in a different part of their application, they forgot to mention that other university. Then the government is going to think, oh, well, you are trying to hide information from us, or you are giving us different types of information. We can't tell who you are, what your background is. And either the case will go into what we call administrative processing. Most of you probably know this as the black hole of where cases go to just sit there for weeks, if not months, if not years, before an adjudication is made. So understanding that consular officer's mindset is incredibly important for anyone who's applying at a U.S. embassy for any type of visa. And especially we've seen this be problematic for Iranians, Syrians, Lebanese, Chinese. And it's not just Republican administrations, unfortunately. Democratic administrations have been equally terrible towards our communities. And for Iranians, the most important thing to also keep in mind are the sanctions list. And so maybe sometime, Eitan, we can have a separate whole like conversation about that. But most people think like, oh, well, I haven't, I didn't do my military service with SEPA. Why is my visa application delayed? But it turns out then that that person, for example, worked in the oil industry or in the construction industry. Those are sanctioned industries, and those visa applications will be delayed, if not denied. So moving on, the last thing I want to mention related to interior to the US is related to the FBI's continued visits, especially of international students, and even people on green card holders, especially if they work in sensitive areas like information, AI or machine learning or physics even, things like that. And the government is all of these government agencies that I talked about, right, from State Department to Customs and Border Protection to the Immigration, CIS, the Citizenship and Immigration Office, they are looking at everything through the national security lens and looking at social media. And now we even understand through some of you might be following, there is a big court case taking place. It was just last week, this past week was the first week of testimony, and next week as well, related to the ideological deportation policy that the US government seems to have towards individuals who have been protesting against the Israeli genocide of Palestinians. And everything then is being scanned in the lens of what I talked about, those two executive orders, the protecting the US from terrorism and the anti-Semitism executive order, and social media, and is being scanned. Pro-Palestine speech is being scanned, and then we've seen obviously my client Rumeysa Ozturk and others like Mahmoud Khalil, Mohsen Madawi, Dr. Suri being detained because all they did was speak out against the genocide. Um, and so I think there's a couple of things. How am I doing on time, Eitan? Are
You're
we
all
okay?
right.
Okay. Um, so a couple of areas related to, how is this going to be impacting, you or your loved ones, and what can you do about it? So briefly, I just want to talk about a few things. For my international students and those on visas like scholars or H-1B workers and even green card holders who feel that they are at high risk, especially because of their pro-Palestine activism, but others as well, especially Iranians who are studying in certain fields, because we have the case of Ali Douroudi, who's done nothing wrong, but who was detained and ultimately chose to leave the United States so that he could get out of that for-profit prison that he was stuck in. Um, Creating a security plan, basically. I have a document in Eton. I'm happy to share that with you, and then you can share it with all the attendees and others related to what are some of the steps to take and how to kind of prepare yourself and maybe people around you for the hopefully unimagined, hopefully it won't happen, the unimaginable, detention and kidnapping by ICE. And so there are a few key points I want to just talk about that. One is, setting up a network of people who will be available to you and like for you to check in with them every once in a while in case you're suddenly detained by ICE. Having, for example, a list of contacts and an attorney, especially that your friends can reach out to or your family can reach out to should you suddenly become detained. And this could be, you maybe have a pending asylum case and you're worried about being detained because you have no other status besides the pending asylum case and you're worried ICE might pick you up. Or you're a student who's engaged in pro-Palestine activism. Um, for any of these scenarios, having a security plan in place like this is important. Maybe memorizing the phone number or keeping the phone number of an attorney in your pocket so that if something happens, you can reach out to them. And if you're traveling to the United States with CBP, then one of the things to do is to speak to a lawyer before you even come to the US, and that way they can track you. So what I've done with some of my clients who are at high risk is they, give me their flight information, and basically I'm on call. When they land at whatever airport, they text me. When they're in line waiting for the primary inspection with CBP, they text me. And then they're supposed to text me when they're at their, getting their luggage. And if I don't hear from them in a reasonable period of time, and so let's say half an hour, an hour, then I know that something is wrong. And then we start to kick in the plan of trying to figure out what's going on. Is this something that's like a simple issue related to like mistaken identity, or is this something more problematic? So, for example, right now I was in touch with a few colleagues where a young Palestinian man, he's 22 years old, got a green card from the US Embassy, the immigrant visa, entered the United States for the first time. He has actually been in detention at Houston Airport since July 5th. They have not released him. And so, unfortunately, it took the family too long to figure out that they should get help. They were worried about resources, not being able to find a lawyer. And so this poor young man has been stuck in detention for a week. So if you're from a country where you're concerned that maybe you're targeted, again, not US citizens, and maybe you have other high risk factors, then please speak to a lawyer before you come so that you don't get stuck in detention at an airport for too long. The only other quick thing I want to say is related to like what people are calling social media like hygiene, and how to handle your social media and that sort of thing. I just want to briefly say what I've told my clients is that, you have to do what's right for you. And if you feel like you are self-silencing yourself and that does not feel right to you, then, talk to a lawyer and figure out like how might your posts impact your immigration status, right? Might it impact your student visa status? Might it impact your green card application? And what you can do about that, because there might be ways where you don't have to compromise, and still be able to stand true to your values. And for other people, it's not a risk that they can take. And so each person really needs to choose for themselves. And I've, just heard of so many instances of everyone just wiping their social media, and it's really eating at them and bothering them. But they never spoke to a lawyer to figure out like how bad might it be. So I would just recommend doing that. The last part I want to talk about is like, what can we do about all of this, right? It sounds hopeless. Sounds like, oh, well, what are we going to do? There's nothing we can do. The government is too aggressive and it's really scary and I don't want to put myself at risk. Um, but it really isn't hopeless. There are things that you can do that we as communities can do together. Like we're all coming together today to talk to you about our rights. But the few things that are important. One is get involved in your communities. I know it is hard as an immigrant to feel maybe welcome sometimes. Maybe you don't have that sense of belonging in the community that you're in. And while it might be hard to put yourself out there, you know, I'm sure there are ways, right, through different community organizations, through friends, through colleagues at work, through family members, where you can slowly get involved in your community civically. Maybe volunteering for a town committee. I serve, for example, in my human resources board for my town. Um, Maybe you get involved with a local business association or a trade or association or a cultural association, or even maybe as an alumna of your university or your trade union. There are different ways where you can make a space for yourself in these communities and get people to know you, and people will then, want to help you and support you. And so if you're feeling afraid, if you're feeling alone, then they're able to work with you and help out. Maybe get involved in politics as well. Call your congressional office. Tell them that you're upset about what's happening to your family members back in Iran. Ask them what they're doing to try to stop, these massive ICE raids. Because unfortunately, what we're hearing it throughout all of the news is, right, oh, the president is doing this, the president is doing that, the courts are doing this, the courts are doing that. Congress is doing nothing. They need to pass immigration reform. They need to stand up to the White House and demand that they follow the rules. Each of these co-equal branches of government has a role. And so talk to your congressional offices, get to know them. Calling them is it's really not that scary. And hopefully, I think maybe Mahsa is going to be talking more about that. But it's so important. And then you know, creating a local response network is definitely something we're seeing happen in a lot of communities. I know that they're very active in California, in Massachusetts. We're very active where we have ICE Watch at the courts. We have organizations that accompany people to the immigration court. So there are so many things that we can all do. So it's really not hopeless. And I think the vast majority, I'll leave this with my last, takeaway is the vast majority of Americans are not happy about what's happening. I cannot tell you how many hundreds of emails, phone calls, texts, letters in the mail that I have gotten, random checks. People sent me random checks saying, thank you for what you're doing for Rumeysa Ozturk. Please keep up the good work. Please continue this. We're all rooting for you, right? There's so much love out there. So please, remember that in everything that you do, because there is hope. And I'm not thinking that this is the end of of the world, but we have to exercise these muscles. If we don't, these muscles will atrophy and we will lose our freedoms and our rights. So I look forward to continuing this work with all of you.
Massa, thank you so much for sharing that.